I get to share the stage with an Apollo guidance computer. I am really excited. But before we get to the Apollo guidance computer, I'm going to start talking about something that I was inspired a little bit from being here last year. And I think that, you talk about like all the millions of Commodore 64s that were sold, and I bet for like, of every 10 Commodore 64s that were sold, there's probably 6 stories that are very similar to Jerry's and maybe similar to mine. I think we all share a very common background that was kind of, created and caused and, initiated from that sort of computer. So a little bit about some of the history I think I want to go into, some like really interesting advancements that happened in different eras that brought us here, and then we'll kind of wrap up with some of the 10 things that I've found that are kind of helpful from my background and what I find when working with younger Gen Z and millennial kids. So yeah, my story works similar. I grew up in Oklahoma, a little town called Hilton, about 4,000 people, halfway between Oklahoma City and Dallas. And yeah, I had a similar story. I saw a TI 994A. My school had 2 of them. That was the computer lab. We had 2 TIs. And I had a friend that had a VIC-20, and I wanted a VIC-20 as well. And I didn't think we had enough money. I didn't think my dad had enough money to buy a Commodore 64. So I didn't ask for a Commodore 64. I asked for a VIC-20. And then so on Christmas morning, there was a VIC-20 sized box under the tree. So I opened it up, and it was a Commodore 64. So that's how I got started. I live in New Jersey right now. I work for a company called iSIMS. We make talent cloud, talent acquisition software. But I worked for a lot of different companies. I think I've been really was in the right place at the right time for a lot of these things. And when I built this slide, I guess I like working for companies that have a blue or a teal logo. I don't know why that's a thing. And also, I guess in American football, they talk about coaching trees. Like, oh, this is the Bill Parcells coaching tree. People that have learned from him. So this is my programming language, coaching trees. These are the things that I either learned for free, just for fun, or things that I was actually paid money to learn and use. So at iSIMS, there are 2 programs that I run. One is a senior internship in partnership with High Tech High School, and we've done. I've mentored 23 students since 2017 through that program. They come and work on site at iSIMS for 1 day a week through a semester. Then I also partner with the Red Bank Charter School, also in New Jersey. We do an 8th grade capstone project where the students come not for a full day, but they come for 2 hours once a week. And we teach the 8th grade students a little bit about computer programming, a little bit about iSIMS and jobs in the tech industry. So I've had a little bit of experience working with some of these younger kids. So, quick preview from the top 10 list. Before you start any mentorship program, don't just go get a bus and go drive around the corner asking kids to come to your workplace. That's not a good thing to do. You really need to make sure that you get things set up and ready with your company. There are things that the companies have to do. Make sure that there's, certificate of insurance coverages. If the kids are going to have access to your company's code, maybe there's non-disclosure agreements. Some companies want to make sure that if the interns are not being paid, that anything they work on is not going to become product that you're going to sell. So there's things you have to do if you want to start a mentorship program with your company, just to be aware of. All right, so I really, to go through the history part here, I think there's these 5 major epochs, these things that happened that really influenced the growth of technology. So let's go through them quickly here. So the first one, right, in this post-World War II era, and because this is a computer history show, you got to think that we're going to talk about, ENIAC and some of the first multi-purpose programmable computers, right? All the wires, but no, there's actually, I think, a more influential thing that happened out of this era, which is the GI Bill. So the GI Bill was signed into law. It had a really boring name, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act. And what this did was it provided, things that didn't happen before, low-cost mortgages so people could buy homes or businesses. Not everybody finished high school in the 40s, and even in the 50s, hard to believe. My uncle dropped out of school at 8th grade. He later became a veterinarian, but he did not finish high school initially. And also it provided for college tuition. And why do I think this is impactful? The number of degrees that were awarded by colleges doubled between 1940 and 1950. And a lot of that had to do with soldiers that came back, took advantage of the GI Bill. Just look at over 2 million people attended universities because of the GI Bill. Almost 7 million people between trade schools and apprenticeships. So I think that provided a burst to the nation of educated people that were ready to do something with that education. So then jump forward a few years, and of course we have the challenge that President Kennedy issued to the nation, that we choose to go to the moon. This was the country did not have the technology, we didn't have the capability to do this, but it was a challenge that was laid forth. And of course, we all know about how the Apollo program and the programs that preceded it changed technology, all the inventions and things that happened. And I guess they're going to talk about one here in a few minutes, right? So what is the most important thing that came out of that period? I have to talk about Tang. Actually, Tang was invented prior to the space. It was invented in the 50s. But I love Tang. And the reason I loved Tang when I was a kid was because I thought the astronauts drink it. But actually what I want to talk about is education again. So that challenge that President Kennedy issued spurred innovation, spurred education. And once again, in that 11-year period, physical science doctorates tripled and engineering doctorates quadrupled. I think that was a direct result of that challenge, that we, once again, had a great number of people that were educated, that knew about electronics, that had interest in physical science, and this population of people that were engineers or were engineer ready were going to be ready for something else that happened next. So what do I think happened next? All right, you should be familiar with, right? The 1977 Trinity, the 3 home computers that were released at the same time. The home computer, they weren't called personal computers yet. That wasn't a word that people quite understood as a thing. But home computers, the fact that, computers were things that were in buildings, computers were things that were in the basements of universities and businesses. And the idea that these educated engineers were excited about was having a computer in their own home. Now, my time frame is a little different here because I'm saying that this period kind of began from 1979. So 77 was the start of it. But I think it took a couple of models, a couple of years for things to happen very quickly. And then we started getting to 1982. Right? Everyone's familiar with the C64, 64 kilobytes of RAM, the MOS 6510, and 2 specialized chips for video and sound, right? Now, if you think about what else was going on just a few years before that, right? You look at this slide, right? They had a MOS processor that was based upon the same thing, but why were these graphics so different? It's those 2 chips that were different, right? Can you actually hear, when you see those images, can you hear them? I feel like when I was a kid, I can hear both of those sounds, like, immediately. Well, anyway, those 2 special chips, obviously, Commodore 64 was amazing. Incredible graphics, incredible sound, and they sold a bunch of them, right? And of course, this goes back to the story of the Tramiel family and how they wanted to really reduce the price and get as many Commodore 64s, right? Computers for the masses, not the classes, right? So the price reduced all the way to almost $200 within over just a little less than a year from the time it was released. And that was totally affordable. And I guess, it's kind of hard They say that somewhere between 12.5 million to 17.5 million were sold. I guess the records were hard to keep at that time. I don't know, that's a plus or minus 5 million. That's pretty amazing to me. And it was in production for a very long time. So go back to what I was saying earlier, right? I said that of every 10 sold, I bet there's 6 people that were inspired as a kid because they had access to a Commodore 64. It's a lot of stories. It's a lot of people impacted. Anyway, I'm not sure if you've ever seen this too, but that machine was pretty solid for what it was. This was an auto body shop in Poland, and they were still using it as of 2016. And yeah, things still running. No security or operating system updates required. Anyway, on this stage, this is where I started off. There's this YouTube video where Leonard was being interviewed, and then also some comments he made on this stage last year. And the prompt was, what would have happened? What was Commodore's legacy? And he said that personal computers would still have existed. That was already happening. You saw the 1977 Trinity, right? There were computers, there were other manufacturers that were heading that direction. So if Commodore wasn't around, that probably would have still happened. But the real thing was because of his father's relentless drive to get that price down, that so many more people bought those computers, so many more people became familiar with them. So that meant that there was, as those kids like myself started to grow up, the industry was ready. The industry needed those people when something next happened, something big happened next. So what happened next? Netscape Navigator, that's where I'm going to jump to, right? Netscape Navigator, version 1.0. Some really interesting history for where this came. This wasn't the first web browser. Mosaic was like maybe one of the better first web browsers, and there was a lot of contention between University of Illinois and the founders of Netscape. You can read that. So think about this. This was released in October of '94, and Netscape pushed the boundaries. There wasn't a very good standard for some of the HTML. They invented things. They were pushing the envelope. They built tables and other things that were built into HTML that only could exist in Netscape. And now they are standards. Now they're everywhere. Did you know that Netscape invented JavaScript? A Netscape engineer invented JavaScript. We use that billions of devices. And they invented HTTP cookies and the SSL protocol. All of this was because of Netscape. They practically had no competition at the time. Netscape Navigator, through word of mouth and through its distribution model, which you could also go to a computer store and buy it in a box. Crazy valuable. So they did an IPO in August of '95. $2.7 billion is what that company was valued at. This was really considered one of the first companies that was a Silicon Valley unicorn. And August of '95, that sort of started to awake Microsoft. And what happened next, right? They raised all that money and promptly lost the browser wars in terrible fashion. They went from 90% market share to being sold off for parts in the late 2000s. And one of the last things they gifted before the company was completely sold off to AOL was they open sourced the code, and that became the Firefox. And that was only the first browser war. There's actually a whole article on the second browser war. And then the second browser war, here it was. Netscape or Internet Explorer took over from Navigator in August of '95, and they said goodbye to it last year. All right, so the result of that, those browser wars led to all this innovation. And I don't think we'd be looking at the economy, the number of companies, the number of innovations that took place, the things that we use every day, all came from the fact that Netscape Navigator existed. All right, so Netscape Navigator and the whole .com era built engineers, built interesting things. We suddenly end up to where I'm going to talk about the iPhone. Can you imagine? So June 28th, 2007 was when the first iPhone started selling. Can you imagine what the world was like on June 27th, the day before. Nokia, that was the #1 mobile phone company. Where's Nokia today? We still had phones, right? We had phones with big keyboards, and we were text messaging on our Blackberries and Palms. Wow, none of those things are around anymore. They were all obliterated because a consumer device that was very easy to use, very friendly, took over the entire market. It was kind of a luxury device when it first was released. Look at the price tag there. You could buy a Samsung Blackjack for $200. You wanted an iPhone, you needed to have $600. But what did this do? Everybody wanted one, and the price dropped, and it opened up a whole new method of accessing the internet. Before then, when you wanted to access the internet, you had to be in front of a computer. You might even have a telephone line connected to your computer if you didn't have broadband yet. And now you had access to the internet in your pocket. Anywhere you went, you could access the internet. And you had a camera. Now, the first iPhone shipped with a 2-megapixel camera. 2. Which seems pretty, small today. But at the time, the #1 camera was in a Motorola phone. It had a 0.3 megapixel camera. So suddenly now, you have the recipe between mobile internet in your pocket and a camera in your pocket. Put those two together, and you end up with social media being created. Now, I think we're all familiar with how this has changed our lives and our society, so I'm not going to go into a lot of time for that, but this entire new category has changed the way that we communicate and talk to each other, the way that information is shared, the way that people live their lives. Maybe not always to the best. And I think this is something that we'll talk a bit later here about one of my tips for how you have to work with children that were raised where social media has always existed in their lives. So, we talked about these large, disruptive, transformative events and technology that changed everything. So depending upon where you were, what age you were when these things happened, you have different life experiences. And you could say that we're all time travelers. We've all started our different spots, yet we've all arrived here together at the same time. So you have different generations, different people that have different experiences, and we're all working together, all living together in one society. And there's words for these things, right? People have names. You've seen some of these names. These are called generational cohorts. And unlike zodiac signs, there's actually real science between people who were born within certain years and experienced certain things. And now, it's not always accurate, but it's generally pretty close. It's almost scarily close. Now, you're probably trying to find yourself, where do I fall on this list, right? Sometimes change, you look at boomers, and the fact that there's actually been kind of recognized that there's a split between the boomers and the Generation Jones. So there's some variability. Some people that were kind of born late in the experience or early in the experience might be a little different, the leading and trailing edges, but these are generally really real things. So we have Gen Z. They're currently either somewhere around ages 11 to 26, so they're starting to enter the workforce now. The millennials, they're pretty well entrenched in the workforce. Somewhere between 27 and 42 years old, right? Companies care about this a lot. Companies do massive amounts of research to try to find and build personas that represent their target market. And you can see Generation A, Generation Alpha, these are young kids, the oldest of them being about 9 or 10 years old. Companies are interested, and they will find out and custom tailor their marketing to fit those targets. All right, so let's get into the top 10 list. That's enough of a history. I think we're all on the same page now. I kind of realized at some point that the Generation Z kids speak a different language, and they don't always want to learn yours. I was working with some Cub Scouts, and this was something that actually happened. A Cub Scout kid asked me why I was putting a save icon into a computer. He had never seen a floppy disk before, but he knew on the toolbar that there was a picture that was the save icon. It's a real thing, which kind of made me realize that they have different experiences. They grew up using technology in a different way. We almost don't come from the same universe, it seems like. And they don't really want to hear about it. So don't be the Grandpa Simpsons that talks about, what technology was when you were a kid, or technology was like when you were a teenager. I do find that they do relate if I talk about how things have progressed. If I talk about how things were better now, or how we learn to use things and things are always changing and getting better, that story I think hits home with them more than just complaining about, oh, you kids don't know what it's like when you only had 4K of RAM. And strangely, I've thought about changing this slide somewhat, because I've actually met a couple of kids recently that kind of find it cool to talk old man speak. They talk about it, like old fiddlesticks and things like that. They kind of like those terms. So maybe they are interested in learning my language. I don't know. All right, number 8. Information access has changed how they learn at home and school. When I was a kid, and I think looking out in the audience, I think a lot of you had to learn by memorizing things. There were closed book tests. So you had to learn and memorize things and being able to reproduce those things. That's how you got your grades, right? We had to spend a lot of time knowing about dates and things like that. School's changing. Information access, the fact that you have a phone and you can retrieve facts. You want to find out what year was the Dutch tulip panic? You don't have to memorize that. You can find that. You can also tell it to find you a picture of a dancing monkey too, so it's challenging, right? So kids are being taught not to memorize things, they're being taught to how to evaluate something. I found something on this vast information source. How do I determine if it's good information? How do I determine if it's valid information? So kids are not memorizing things anymore. Kids are learning how to synthesize information. And schools are really changing the way that they approach these projects. Teachers used to be the people that were trying to drill facts into our heads, and now teachers are more about facilitators. They're trying to create projects that have outcomes so that the students create their own learning journey. This is a lot different than the way I went to school. So when I work with the kids that come through my programs, I try to do the same thing. I try to set up projects. I set the project that has a goal. I let them find their own path through that solution. That's their learning path. This is the way that they are more comfortable with it. I don't try to build facts upon them. I don't try to tell them you will do X, Y, and Z. I say you're trying to arrive at Z, go. And they're surprisingly good about navigating the world and finding their own way through these things. All right, talking about navigating the world. I found out these Gen Z kids are really good with virtual tools, but they actually understand and realize that they're missing out on a lot of in-person experiences, and they really value those in-person experiences. Right, look at all these tools, right? They know how to use these. They know how to use them really well. They have friends that are farther flung than anybody when I was their age. When I was their age, my friend set pretty much was who I could, within bicycle or a short car ride from my parents, from my house. That was my friend group. Now kids have access to the entire world. Through these platforms, they have friends in different time zones, in different countries, with different languages. It's a very diverse group that knows how to communicate with each other. And of course, I'll mention, COVID and virtual school, that really changed them. That really gave them a different way that they were forced to use these tools and didn't have those in-person connections. And it's strange because I talk with them a lot, and I ask them, I say, hey, this internship experience, you can do it remotely, or you can come into the office. And since COVID restrictions have ended, not a single one has wanted to do it remote. Everyone wants to come to the office and be in person. And it's good because it gets me an opportunity to kind of teach them communication skills. This is a Reddit meme of some sort, but it's a real one. I talk to them about how to pay attention. I talk to them about the importance of and when eye contact is good. During a job interview, very good. Eating a banana, no. Before COVID, I also used to teach the kids how to do handshakes. This is strange, right? This maybe is a skill, and COVID maybe has changed it to the point that it doesn't really matter anymore. But it used to be how many handshakes I had from children that were just sort of limp hands, and I would teach them how to properly shake hands. I think that skill is disappearing and doesn't matter anymore, but these are things that I think made a difference to them. I also talked to one of my interns just last week, and he was talking about when I have a conversation with somebody on a, remotely, it's sort of a transaction. I'm not as invested in them. But when I sit in front of somebody and we're actually having a conversation face to face, this is not a transaction, this is a relationship, and it feels different to them, and they value that. So think about that when you set up any mentorship program or when you're trying to relate to them, that they really appreciate the value and the difference of an in-person conversation. Okay, so I found out that I feel like a lot of these Gen Z kids have been, consuming content. They never have known television that you could not pause. They've always had access to information and tons of content, but sometimes they can be hard to turn into creators. And I think that's where, from the vintage computing angle, you look at that. These machines, the Commodore, the Apple II, and the Tandy TRS-80 here, right? You turned them on, and within 2 seconds, they were instantly available, and you were in a programming environment. To do anything with those machines, you had to almost be a computer programmer. If you wanted to load a program from disk, save a program from disk, you had to know commands, you had to type things. That's why of every 10 Commodores sold, I feel like 6 people have some story that said I learned to be a computer programmer from this, because that was what it took. So we had this availability when we use this technology that we had to learn it. Now, I use this because today, how hard is it to create? If I took this Windows PC in front of me, how would I be able to create a Hello World program? It's not easy. I'd have to be able to put some sort of IDE on here, might have to have some kind of library, I have to compile it and build it on the Windows framework possibly, or a command line thing. It's not easy. So we use a couple tools to try to facilitate that. One is the REPL IT. It's a wonderful in-browser experience. We can use it with the kids. They can sign in with their Google account. They can access this anywhere. There's no prerequisites. It works on every browser. It's a wonderful programming environment for Python. There's a whole lot of other libraries that you can do there. So by giving them a way that they can get instantly into a programming environment and see results, that helps them a lot, I think. Now, same thing for electronics, right? You might have been okay when you first tried to learn and you had breadboards and jumpers and you were trying to figure out how to hook up 2 LEDs and make them do something. And that much setup is hard when your attention span is maybe used to a little more instant access. So we found a couple things. This, the Adafruit, the Circuit Playground Express, and the BBC Microbit. These are both devices that have a lot of things built into them. They got LEDs, they have sensors, they have buttons. You can do a whole lot with them without having to set up a breadboard and do a bunch of jumpers. So these are very quick ways to give them access to results. And now, after they start seeing results fast, they get intrigued, interested, and they can get into more deeper projects. Okay, flexibility is in their DNA, because these kids have learned that things change fast. How long did you use your first computer? You probably had it for 5 years, 10 years. Your first video game console? Same thing, I bet you had it for 5 or 10 years. First laptop? Same thing. We used to have slower cycles so that when you had something, you could use it for a long time. Nowadays, how often do you replace your laptop? How often do you replace your phone? Things move at a very fast pace, and I think kids have experienced that. They know how fast things are getting better, and you just go through them. It's just a commodity. It's not an investment. I'm not buying a computer that's going to last me for 10 years anymore. I'm buying a computer that will last me 18 months. And of course, COVID, things were already different. The way that schedules and the Gen Z kids had to live through all the activities and things that they were being put into, they were already used to living a different life that went from, getting up and going home, going to school, going to activities, back to home, doing my homework. They had this cycle. And then, of course, COVID changed all that. COVID changed that, and now became, school became something they did at home. And then that changed in the schedule. So they've always had a great amount of change in their life. And I actually used this because I learned this lesson a few years ago. Because I used to work with millennials, right? The millennials, which are now, well into the workplace. But millennials don't like change. Millennials, if you're going to maybe, we had a schedule change. Oh no, we're going to do something different today. I had to kind of think about it and plan. How am I going to tell them this thing is changing? I have to kind of make sure I've got a plan for how I'm going to roll it out. I'm going to talk about how it's going to affect them. I'm going to prepare them for this so they don't freak out. And approach it I'm really sorry, this is changing, here's why, we'll take you through that, we'll be okay. And I first started doing this, and I realized the Gen Z kids, they weren't reacting to it in the same way. They're just yeah, sure, fine. And I kind of realized wait, I don't have to do that. They're used to being changed. I don't have to prepare it like I used to have to do for the millennials. So there's a lot of flexibility. They're used to that. And so I kind of use this. And in fact, not only do I realize that I don't have to prepare a big change control process, I can actually need to actually kind of do some things different to keep their attention. I don't know if you've noticed even in this slide deck that I've used some different themes, some different fonts, some different colors. This is kind of the same thing. I don't do it too much so it's not crazy, but doing a little bit of unexpected things, changing things almost on purpose, actually helps in some ways when you're working with the kids that expect things to change. Okay. Number 4, your local librarian needs your help. Although I would warn you a little bit here, if you start Googling and searching for librarians that need help, make sure you have your safe search on. There's a lot of weird results you might get for that. Anyway, so iCIMS has also been sponsoring these teams. It's amazing. Libraries have buildings. They have facilities. They have computers. Librarians want to help kids. They have money, they have budgets for things, for communications. But what the librarians lack is time. Librarians don't have sometimes the skills to run a program. They don't have the volunteers. So iCIMS has been somewhat successful. We've worked with different library systems around the New Jersey area, and we've ran programs with the partnership with the Girls Who Code program and for programming microcontrollers. So it's been a very successful way to reach out and touch those kids' lives and give them a program that's very helpful and supportive. And the libraries are a great resource. They just need your help. All right, speaking of libraries, I'm also going to talk about schools. Schools have the same thing. They've got buildings and facilities, but teachers are some of the most underappreciated people on the planet, right? Teachers, in order to organize an after-school program, sometimes they have to pay for the supplies out of their own pocket. So I would say another way is to reach out, talk to your local middle school, your high schools, their volunteer coordinators. Sometimes they have programs that are ready, that just need help. Sometimes they have interest but don't know how to run a program. You don't know how to start a program? There's a lot of out-of-the-box things that these organizations have almost like a playbook that you can use for how do I start a program and how do I run a after-school program. And that can really change a lot of lives if you start early at a middle school level and start teaching people how to code. All right, number 2, we're almost there. Your local community college has a club that needs a mentor. You're probably wondering, why am I saying community college? Well, this is the truth. Millennials and the Gen Z kids have really started to wonder about the value of a degree from a certain institution, the expense of student loan debt. Should I go into $30,000 of debt to get a 4-year degree from this university? Or I can go for almost, $500 a year. I can go to this community college and get a 2-year degree. Community colleges are seeing a new resurgence and a new connection to the community. Community colleges have always been important in terms of trying to reach underserved groups in their communities. But now community colleges are becoming even more important. But there's differences, right? A big university, a 4-year school, they have students that live on campus. So that means students are available for a club, a program that would meet in the evening. Smaller schools don't have the same access to those students. Their students tend to churn at a higher pace too. A 4-year university, a student will be there on campus for 4 years, 5 years maybe in some cases. But a community college, that student's only going to be in the school for 2 years. So they have a lot of churn. It's hard to kind of get a foundation for a club. So anyway, I talked to the chairman of the computer science group at this Brookdale Community College, and he was really excited about this. He says, yes, we have a computer club, but do you want to run it? He says they can't find anybody to do it. They would love to have people in the industry come and share and help mentor a club, because community college professors, just like high school teachers, they're really not that well compensated. So community colleges, your local community college probably needs you as a mentor for a computer science club. All right, and my last one. All right, if we're engineers, I think that there's a specific personality type that makes you interested in relating to machines. And I think it's hard to say, how do I put myself out there? How do I make myself vulnerable? How do I get over my social anxieties to go and do these things? Byron, you're telling me to go to my community college and talk to somebody. That's hard. How do I do that? I could say that the rewards of helping others and the rewards of building up a future generation of engineers are well worth the difficulty and the slight discomfort. I think you'll find that people are really accepting. People really want their help in these situations I've talked about. They'll welcome you and be interested in anything that you can do to help them. And something I would probably like to go back to a little bit here is the ranges of these slides. Pardon me, I'm going to go back to, I should have probably copied this slide. Because I think about, there's gaps here, and these gaps are almost predictable for how often some completely changing event will reach us. Do you think the next thing is here already? Do you think that the generative AI will be the thing? I don't know. I'm really curious about this. A few years ago when I started thinking about this, is blockchain the thing? And blockchain kind of became snake oil, so I don't know. But generative AI, I think, might be the thing. So are we doing the right things to create curious, investigative, interested kids that want to become engineers that are going to help build the next big thing? Maybe. I think we got work to do there, but I think it's progress. Anyway, that's about all my time. I'm going to jump forward here back to my final list of my top 10 things. And that's about my time. So thank you for listening, everybody. All right, we do have a couple of minutes, so any questions or just find me here. I'll be around the show. I'll be talking about sprites in the afternoon. If you want to come back, talk about sprites. A lot of fun. Any questions, thoughts? Yes? Yeah. So the question was, how do you deal with kids who don't have the technical expertise to actually think about how something works, right? They're thinking about all right, this is just a commodity. A few years ago, I'll relate this story to my father. My father felt like, he didn't want a car that had any computers in it. He thought that if he had a car that he had a screwdriver and a pair of pliers, he could fix anything that was on a car when it was mechanical. And a lot of people these days couldn't do that because they can't, because the components aren't made the same way. So there's some parts of it that are okay. I think there's some parts that are okay. You expect things to be commodities, appliances, if you would, right? That's why the iPhone is so successful. It's an appliance. You don't have to know a lot to use it. But when I talk to engineers that are coming through my internship program that have interest in computer science, they kind of question, they want to understand why that computer is doing that. And they think it helps them understand how to operate it. They think that if I understand how it works, maybe I can debug it faster and get through problems, versus I've seen kids that aren't interested in computer science and they come to the internship programs and they don't have the same debugging skills. They don't have the same curiosity. So my point being that I think that it's not for everybody. I don't believe in that everybody should learn to code necessarily. I think there's people that have personality types that it gravitates toward. And by I go back to the instant own stuff. When I work with kids and we give them a way that they can get over that first barrier. The first barrier with electronics is like, all right, there's an LED, can you make it turn on and off? And how fast you can do that project to make them turn an LED on and off. And suddenly, like, they went from like, I'm intimidated, this is all complex stuff, how in the world can anybody understand how to build these things? And you teach them something very small, very quick, and maybe you'll see the spark. Maybe you won't see the spark, and that's okay. There's lots of other fields and disciplines and things that people can do. They don't all have to be engineers. All right, yes? Yeah. It's true. I think that's, the interesting thing about that, I guess the question here, or the comment is more along the lines of, when you're so used to, I can find information about anything straightforward, but how do I, get to that part? How do I know what to trust? And how things are like moving to the point that, you can't fix everything with a screwdriver and a pair of pliers anymore. That's just not the nature of our technology. I think it's interesting in terms of, if you go around the show today and look at some of the projects, I've seen things that people are doing that they couldn't have done with the same tooling. You talk about, I needed to have a $20 million investment to build a chip. And now I need like a $12 investment and I can build a chip. So I think it's like the tools are getting better. The tools are different. They're not screwdrivers anymore. Now the tools are more complex. But they're kind of, I guess, building upon the foundation of those things, and they're going to continue to get better. So I look forward that way. That's why the same thing. If I wanted to have one of those like BBC microbits and, hey, here's how you need to be able to turn and flash an LED. 15 years ago to teach that, I had to have a whole setup. And now I can teach that in like 10 minutes because it's all on one little device. So I guess I just look at it as things are getting better, tools are getting better, it's just getting easier. Yeah, I guess programming it, I was saying, programming it versus like, yes, if I just had two wires, LED and a battery, yes, you could do that. I'm talking about programmatically if I wanted to do it like with an Arduino before, I had to have some setup. Yes? I'm not sure if I quite understand the question. Oh. Yeah, so the comment is really about, we went through like large population booms, how, baby boomers, large generation, Gen X, small generation, millennials, big generation, and Gen Z, Gen A are actually population-wise smaller. Our population size seems to be growing, right? The country's population is somewhat shrinking in somewhat. I don't know the impact that's going to be. I think it is challenging sometimes where I have talked to some teachers where they had schools in the early 2000s, they had to bring in like mobile homes and trailers to house all the students. They had to have all these temporary classrooms set up. And now the enrollment has dropped in those schools because the younger children are a smaller group, that they don't need all those temporary classrooms anymore. I do think that's going to have an interesting impact. I don't know. I don't really know what that is, because I felt the same thing where Gen X was a smaller group, and millennials kind of changed the game. I think maybe there's a larger generation on the cusp if I look at the ebb and flow of these things. I don't know. Thank you. All right, well, that's about all my time. Thank you, everybody, for staying and listening, and I'll see you later this afternoon. All right.